Hi, everyone. Welcome. I think we can go ahead and get started as people continue to trickle in. My name is Emma Akmakdjian. I am the Chief Curator and Director of K-12 Programming at the San Luis Obispo Museum of Art, which is very lucky to be hosting our current exhibition in the Gray Wing called Atmospheres Deep. So we're really happy to be hosting this panel tonight. I am not going to say much because I am not an expert on anything related to the show, but I just wanted to welcome you all on behalf of the museum. The reception of Atmospheres Deep at the museum has been incredible. So much meaningful engagement, good questions, students, lots of curiosities and interests. So congratulations to the curators, Emma and Rochelle. Emma is with us and will be speaking shortly, and to all the artists involved. I also want to thank our generous donors who made this show possible and also made the expansion of the show possible. Initially, it was meant to be a smaller exhibition upstairs before the museum was renovated, and we were able, through their generosity, to bring it into the Gray Wing and really give it the space it deserves. So I want to thank Pacific Western Bake, Barbara Renshaw, PG&E, and Hotel San Luis Obispo, as well as KSBY. So the way tonight will go is I'm going to disappear. Emma and Elizabeth are going to welcome all of you and get the panel discussion started, and I will see you at the end for some museum announcements. Thank you for spending the evening with us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emma. My name's Isabel Beavers, and I want to welcome everyone to our panel discussion tonight on art, climate, and the ocean on behalf of SUPERCOLLIDER. We're thrilled to be here with you to discuss the work that's in the exhibition and the themes included in Atmospheres Deep at San Luis Obispo Museum of Art. We're so grateful to the museum for hosting us, and it's been a really wonderful experience to be able to work with the community of San Luis Obispo on this exhibition. Before handing it over to my colleague Emma to introduce the exhibition theme and the artists, I just wanted to tell you quickly about SUPERCOLLIDER. As I mentioned, my name is Isabel Beavers. I am Artistic Research Manager with SUPERCOLLIDER. We are an art sci-tech organization that produces immersive exhibitions in the greater Los Angeles area and beyond, as well as field building programming, including our SciArt Ambassador program and our upcoming artist and scientist residencies. And SUPERCOLLIDER believes in a future where art, science, and tech collide to inspire social and environmental responsibility. We bring together leading artists, scientists, and the public to celebrate the future and reframe the challenges facing our world today. In this process, we hope to build accountability networks and creative connection across disciplines and locations to spark new skill sets for humanity, collective perseverance, and collaborative action. Our headquarters is located at the Beacon Arts Building in Los Angeles, but we partner often with satellite locations to host exhibitions throughout Los Angeles, throughout the nation, and internationally. And we are very excited to be here with all of our panelists who are exhibiting artists and researchers associated with the topics of our current satellite exhibition, Atmospheres Deep. So I will hand it over to Emma to tell us a little bit more about the show and introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Isabel, for that introduction to SUPERCOLLIDER. I am a fellow ambassador for SUPERCOLLIDER Art and Science Gallery, and I'm here today to speak a little bit about Atmospheres Deep and introduce our panelists. I am one of the co-curators, along with Rochelle Gribble from SUPERCOLLIDER, who put on the show here at San Luis Obispo Museum of Art. So welcome again. Very happy that you guys could all join us tonight to talk about art and the intersection with science. This show has some main themes to it, and we find that a lot of the works are central and focus on the process of creating art and considering oceanic climate change specifically, and the interconnectivity of all bodies of water and how that has informed the art process and our collective consciousness about the health of the ocean. And also biodiversity being a very important tenet of the health of the ocean. And so many of the artists have pieces that speak to biodiversity, interconnectivity, and the process of thinking of climate change and the ocean. So I would like to welcome our panelists and kick it off with a first question that is about this intersection between art and science. So in your practice, in either your scientific research or your artistic research, how do science and art inform or transform one another? And this is open to all panelists. Oh, sorry, excuse me. Let's do introductions very quickly. I was so eager to just jump right in. I'm so sorry, you guys. We're going to do quick introductions with the panelists, and I'm going to start in the order of artists on my screen. So Christine Wertheim, would you like to start us off with a quick introduction of yourself and your work?
I think you're on mute still, Christine.
I'm not used to not being in control of it. Hi, my name's Christine Wertheim, and the work that I have on show is related to a project, a long-term project I have with my sister called the Crochet Coral Reef, in which my sister and I, make crochet coral reefs, and we show them in galleries. And when we show them, the citizens of that town or country or state, depending on how big it is, make their own reefs. And to date, we've had something like nearly 20,000 people contribute reefs around the world. And we currently have one about to open in Canada. And that's all I'll say for now.
Thank you for the introduction, Christine. I'll go with the next person on my screen, Courtney Madison.
Thanks, Emma. I'm Courtney Madison. I'm an artist and ocean conservation advocate based in Los Angeles, and I do mostly large-scale ceramic sculptural wall reliefs and other sculptural objects that are inspired by the fragile beauty of coral reefs and the human-caused threats that they face, primarily focused on climate change. Sorry about the sirens. Hopefully they'll quiet down. I'll mute.
The next person, thank you so much for the introduction, Courtney, and don't worry about the ambulance. That happens all the time to me. The next person on my screen is Maru.
Sure, thank you so much, Emma. Thank you, Isabel, for the invitation. My name is Maru Garcia. I'm a transdisciplinary artist and researcher. My work lives at the intersection of art, science, and environment. My use of media includes research, installations, performance, sculpture, video, usually with the presence of some kind of organic matter to help understand the biological processes occurring in complex systems. My areas of interest are explorations on biosystems, interspecies relationships, and the capacity of living organisms, and that is including humans, to act as remediators, healers, and regenerators in contaminated sites. And thank you so much again for the invitation.
Thank you, Maru, for that excellent introduction. Last but not least, we have Ben.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ben Ruttenberg. I'm a professor at Cal Poly and the director for the Cal Poly Center for Coastal Marine Sciences. A lot of my research has spanned, topics thinking about things like climate change, food sustainability, and my actually PhD training was looking at coral reefs, and a lot of my work until recently has focused on coral reefs. So it's very exciting to be thinking about, the artistry and the beauty of coral reefs, which, I have appreciated from a scientific perspective, and it's so refreshing to think about this from a strictly an art perspective, and the beauty that they have, which all of us scientists sort of know about and sometimes lose sight of when we're so focused on our work. So thank you to all the artists for highlighting just their beauty and their fragility.
Thank you for these wonderful comments, Ben. That makes me very happy. And I'm really excited by this exchange of information just already, that so many of you are focused on coral reefs and their health and well-being. And also to the point that, many of the people on this panel here have graduate degrees in science and are also artists. And so there isn't really so much of a separation between these two in our thinking today. So with that, I will now begin with the first question that just goes back to what I said 5 minutes ago. But how do art and science transform or inspire one another? And how does that particularly work in your field, whether it's scientific or artistic? And this is open to all panelists to respond.
I'm happy to go. I think art and science have a lot in common. I trained first as a scientist and chose art because I found coral reefs so beautiful, as you just said, Ben. And I think like artists and scientists are exploring the world and trying to answer questions about it in sometimes really similar ways. And so in making that transition from science to art in my own career, I really find a lot of that commonality, and I use kind of the vocabulary and even some of the dissection instruments and tools that I used as a scientist in my art practice. I feel like they're completely interrelated.
Yeah, jumping in with the same situation, I think that, yeah, a lot of people consider that art and science are opposite, but I agree with Courtney. Myself also coming from the sciences and then migrating to the arts, I feel that, yeah, there's of course, yeah, different methodologies sometimes, sometimes languages also, but I think both art and science come from the same need that we have to really understand our environment and ourselves, what is around us. So they both share the curiosity, creativity, imagination, even like the need of being persistent. So yeah, that's why, like in my case, I consider that it's very important to really explore these interactions and this ways of collaborating. But also in my case, that is why I chose to go through like the research made in the transdisciplinary area, so we can go beyond these compartments and really start to do work that is like holistic, in a holistic point of view. But yeah, that's what I think about this.
Well, I guess I'll just say from the scientific perspective, a lot of us, have our scientific approach. We make observations, we come up with hypotheses, and then we try to go collect some data to test that. And one of the really important, I think one of the really important parts of science is scientific communication. And I will say that it is something that generally those of us who are scientists do not communicate particularly well to the general public. And I love the idea of having art as a way to help communicate in essentially using. I always think of this as kind of the other side of our brains, and how to communicate the fragility, the beauty, the transitory nature, all of these things about these ecosystems, these organisms that we study, that very often we are not able to articulate or convey particularly well, that art does so well.
I'll say something at this point. I'm very interested to hear that I believe you said, Maru, as well as Courtney, that you both done science degrees before you became artists. Because one of the things that interests me is how much, there's a lot of talk in the art science world about the degree to which art can actually influence science. And it's very clear that science influences artists, and that, all of us, our project included, is the work is based on scientific work and scientific understandings of things, which we are then in some sense translating into art. But we started off our project, which is wider than the Crochet Coral Reef, but includes that, to be an organisation. The organisation is called the Institute for Figuring, and we started it off to be an institution for communicating about science research But we have never been able to get any funding at all from the scientific community. All our funding and all our support has always been in the art world. And this is a great sadness to my sister, who is a professional science communicator. And Ben made the comment before that art is a great tool for communicating about the findings of science. But our experience has been, and I'm curious if you've had any different reaction, that the scientific community itself, in terms of funding or actual material support, has not been interested. Now, it may be that our project is too women-centric in the sense it's crocheting, which a lot of people see as sort of old or middle-aged ladies doing fluffy jumpers, and they literally are irked by it. And maybe you guys' work has a more is more attractive to the people in the scientific world who tend to be men. But I'm curious about your experience of, you know, when people talk about the interaction between art and science, we really find that it's the art world that's interested in the science, and it's really not very much, or it hasn't been anything the other way around, really, in our case, although that was our aim. And I'm curious about, given that you come from science backgrounds, what has been your experience of this?
That's really interesting. I wouldn't expect that. First, Christine, I need to tell you that when I was in college, I was finishing up my thesis project on making corals to inspire conservation out of clay. And I saw one of the first crochet coral reefs in 2007, and it was just like life-changing for me. It was so cool. And I really admire everything you've done with that project and beyond. So it's great to connect with you. And
thank you. Was that at track 16?
What's that?
Was it at track 16? Where was it?
I read about it in a magazine when I was in college. And then it's not long after that, it went to the Smithsonian in DC.
Oh, right. Thank you.
Yeah, but anyway, I'm surprised that there wouldn't be funding from the science side. I think I haven't really been in the position to do fundraising like as a nonprofit or beyond just myself as an individual artist. So I probably don't have enough experience in that regard, but I have found a lot of support from individual scientists who want to champion artists in communicating about the science that their work is inspired by. So someone, you know, that I immediately think of is Dr. Jane Lubchenco, who was the director of NOAA when I was in graduate school. And she was a really great advocate for, she is a great advocate for science communication, and in particular for the work I was doing back then. And so that didn't necessarily translate into funding, but in terms of resources and legs up in terms of kind of making the foundations of an art career, I think that was really helpful.
Yeah, yeah, I'm surprised too about like the situation with the project that you're mentioning, Christine, because I know it's a really beautiful project and it has had like a lot of attention from like, of course, the arts perspective, but also the community engagement. But yeah, following a little bit what Courtney was saying, I think the idea of partnering probably with a scientist would be the easiest way, because as I was mentioning, we have probably different languages, and probably the way that they speak about like a proposal or things like that, they're using their own way. And that's right now I'm actually working, starting a collaboration with a scientist, and it's good because he can like really use all the ingredients that could make a proposal more like for the sciences appealing. So yeah, I think that would be something like important to consider, if there is a way in which you can really partner with someone that is already doing research related with what you're doing. So the project is like really collaborative, and yeah, we both can jump to the arts and then I will translate it, and then that other scientist will do the same for the sciences. So I think it's just a matter of language in my perspective, but yeah. And of course, like the way that everything is written and like the objectives and everything. So that would be my only I don't know, case that I can talk about.
Yeah, I will say from the science side, very often a lot of the grants that we apply to ask us for outreach and engagement plans. How are we going to take our science and develop broader impacts to have an impact beyond just our scientific community, so that we're not just writing a paper by scientists that's going to be read by other scientists. You know, how do we transition this? And you know, Courtney mentioned Jane Lubchenco, who is, I mean, a brilliant scientist, and also, you know, Jane recognized the importance of science communication, because, you know, the scientific information that we have is only so useful if we aren't able to get to the broader community. And so I will say I have not considered art as a way to develop those broader impacts, but I think it's a brilliant idea. And like Maru said, you know, engaging, basically maybe collaborating with some scientists that are working in that field, I would imagine it to be innovative, creative, really interesting, and actually probably really exciting. And my guess is that it would help the scientific proposal. You know, all of the science would be potentially more fundable if there's this novel way of trying to communicate these broader impacts and the broader importance. So I think that's a great idea, and I actually would love to incorporate that into some of the work that we're doing.
I love how this conversation is developing, because Emma and I, when sort of talking through some of the discussion points, started to think about how different organisms cohabitate, especially in like an oceanic system. And we started thinking about the relationship between artists and scientists as possibly one of cohabitation in the space of science communication. So maybe another way to frame this conversation, and a question to sort of deepen the conversation a little bit, is how could you imagine that artists and scientists could better cohabitate the space of science communication in the future? What would you like to see happen there?
I kind of start. I think in my case, I really want to see more projects that are like really coming from both angles. Like the beginning of the project is actually thought by the scientists and the artists, and with the objective of making the project itself a process, like the research itself, like focusing on the research, in like using the methodologies of like the two areas that we're mentioning right now. So that would be ideal in my perspective, when we are taking this project not just as the opportunity for science communication, that of course is very important, like, and it's something that we need to keep doing as artists, but also when the projects themselves are the research, and both researchers, in this case the artists and the scientists, are doing their own way. I think for me, like, that connection is even stronger, and I would love to see more projects that are like from the beginning thought as a hybrid situation.
I think there are a lot of opportunities for overlap and hybridization. I think I had one project that was kind of interesting semi-collaboration, where I was commissioned to do a project for Oceanographic Center where scientists do research on coral reef conservation issues, different aspects of threats to coral reefs. And I tried to kind of take ideas from particular researchers and incorporate them into this kind of reef that I was building. And I felt like there was so much potential there to really have the scientists kind of speak through the art. Like, they could tell me all about this amazing species of sponge that ate corals and did all this amazing stuff, and I would be able to kind of like tell that story through sculpture and through kind of creating fantastical versions from these stories that they would tell me. And I feel like it makes me want to do more and kind of dive deeper into that. And I haven't really had that opportunity in terms of my own art practice, but it is something that would be really fascinating.
Yeah, I love thinking about the idea of storytelling. You know, I think that's one thing that artists are really good at and think a lot about. And I've always sort of thought of the field of sci art as being something that is new and generated, that's not really just like a combination of art and a combination of science and like where that meets in the middle in the Venn diagram, but that there's really this new territory being forged by that, and thinking about what that could bring in the future to our understandings. And as Maru said, the way research happens from the very outset. And so that makes me think a lot about process. And I'd be curious, maybe we could shift a little bit to talking about everyone's process. It sounds like all of us here on the panel are really involved in research in a big way. So I'd love to hear you talk about a little bit how your creative research relates to your process. And then maybe how you thought about that process in terms of the ocean and oceanic systems.
Hi, I can talk about our process of creating the coral reefs and the process as it's developed over time. The project's been going now, started into the end of 2005, so it's like 16 years now. And in the beginning, we started off, sorry, my glasses are reflecting from my screen, but in the beginning, we started off doing crochets of a mathematical model of what's called hyperbolic space, which is a type of geometry, and it is in fact the geometry that you find on the surfaces of many sea creatures, including different kinds of corals. It's that curly geometry. And you also find it on the edges of lettuces and in some cactuses and a couple of other natural organisms. And so we were doing mathematical models because a woman called Dana Tamina, who's a mathematician and a serious crocheter, had discovered that you could, in fact, model hyperbolic space using crochet, whereas previously mathematicians had actually thought you couldn't build real models in real space of this particular geometry, that it couldn't exist in real space. And it turns out at least a pseudo model of it can. So in a sense, our research was started off from being a mathematical project, but talking about how maths is embodied in real material and how you actually discover properties of the geometrical forms when they're embodied and embedded in actual real materials, that the mathematicians who aren't dealing with embodiment, they're dealing with, for want of a better word, pure form, didn't know about. And in fact, since we've been doing the project, we have had interactions with some mathematicians who've been studying hyperbolic space, and they've been surprised to come upon the possibility that when these mathematical forms are embodied in actual materials, that they behave differently than the pure mathematical forms. But after a while of making these models, we had a pile of them on the coffee table, and I said, oh, it looks like a coral reef. We could start crocheting coral reefs, because they did look like coral reefs. And so that's how we started. And then people started joining us, and we invited everybody to contribute. And over time, a whole evolution of forms has developed. And although we didn't start out to do this, it has in fact developed over time that we have actually created a project that is actually a real experiment in evolution, not guided by a single designing hand. And what we like to say is that it is possible that life on Earth was designed by some overarching designer, but the crochet coral reef is living proof that you can generate a wide taxonomy of forms that slowly evolve through random mutation, because that's actually what has been going on in our project. So in a way, we regard the community element, which has allowed the project to evolve like a piece of natural evolution, as the most important level, which we could never have predicted. Nobody could have predicted, or possibly somebody could have predicted, but we didn't. And it just naturally evolves. And it is an actual real scientific demonstration that natural evolution by random mutation is possible, even if life on Earth did not evolve that way. And that's one of the things that interests me, is projects that can go long term and involve lots of people, and involve lots of people and evolve over time. But that's part of the element that the art gallery loves, but so far we haven't managed to get anybody in the scientific world to be interested in it. And maybe it's because of the materials, as I said, because it's crochet and it's not very science friendly, but there's processes whereby tens of thousands of people collectively evolve and do something over time. That's what Margaret and I have come to see as the most interesting aspect of our project, apart from the plastic, which is another issue.
Wow, I'm so blown away by this idea of micro and macro scales and how things scale up and patterns repeat. And I'm not turned off at all by the fact that the crocheted coral reef is crochet. I actually think it's really wonderful demonstration of domestic feminine handcraft, and this is interconnectivity, right? There's this ancestry with crocheting. Sorry, now I'm just like speaking about your work. Apologies, but I feel like I just needed to intercept and say that it has this ancestry. And when you think of bioevolution, you think of an ancestry, and you think of this form as evolving. And just to the point that you said that, you know, this is a pattern that repeats itself in nature in so many different forms. I have to mention that the dean of Cal Poly, the dean of sciences for Cal Poly, he walked into the exhibition when it was half done, full construction mode, and he says, "Oh, it's a pink lace bryozoan." And he was pointing straight at Christine's piece. And I said, "No, that's the crocheted coral reef." But I was so blown away by the fact that he could interpret this as a completely different species, but just the fact that there's so many scales to this pattern, that it is repetitive, but it's really incredible, this layering of biodiversity that can happen in the ocean. And so I think that, to me at least, this project seems like a testament to that. But yeah, so maybe even just opening the conversation to this idea of biodiversity and work, and how important it is to what you do, and why it's important to humans, or why it's important to your art, and how art just can show this physical formation of science or math, I think is really interesting. And I think maybe others of you in your practice have encountered this. I'd love to hear more.
I love pink lace bryozoans. I saw one in the wild for the first time when I was scuba diving in Alor in eastern Indonesia back before COVID started, and it just blew my mind. I thought it was a scrunchie from someone's hair. It was so cool. That kind of biodiversity is just mind-blowing. It's like aliens living on our own planet, because so many people don't know what lives under the surface of the ocean. And it's an opportunity that I've had to go scuba diving in lots of remote places like that, that I feel like a huge responsibility to bring that above the surface and show that beauty of biodiversity to viewers, and really celebrate that, because that's what gets people excited and hopeful and curious enough to connect personally to acting to conserve the ocean. And I think that's all kind of connected, and can get people really inspired. There's beauty in biodiversity.
I'll say it's not an accident that scientists love studying coral reefs. You know, part of it, sure, the water's warm and there's lots of interesting questions in there, you know, obviously critically important ecosystems. But part of it is just because we love being in that environment, because there's just so much shocking beauty. And, you know, like when I'm doing research dives focused on whatever data I'm collecting, frantically following a fish, or, you know, taking data on a coral or whatever it is. And if I've got a little time at the end of the dive, you know, go swim off and start taking pictures, just trying to frame something interesting looking. And it's, you know, I don't have to go looking, right? It's all right there. It's just a question of me trying to find that space to frame whatever that thing is. And most of the time the pictures are terrible, but sometimes they're interesting. And often we're excited about the science, but we just love being in the environment, partly because there's so much of that natural beauty, and then understanding how all of this connects together, and these systems evolved over many millions of years, and how critical they are to supporting all life on Earth, including ours. Just means that they're that much more important, and we need to conserve them. So if we can find ways to communicate their importance and their beauty, that's also critically important. So.
Yeah, for me, it's actually going back to what is even the definition of ecology, right? The study of relationships and interactions inside ecosystems. And I think that in my case, that is a main source of inspiration, just learning and researching how can we better develop these relationships and understand them. It's what is in the core of my own practice, but also in general in my interest. So I was thinking a little bit about like the process, and I thought that I want always to consider the process, the piece itself, like the research and the process, it's part of it. I would say that I sometimes, well, a lot of times value the process over the results. Even if I already have something that I want to show in an exhibition or anything, I would prefer to start with this idea and try to make it develop like in these different ramifications. I look at it a little bit like as your corals, Christine, or like this dendritic growth that allows different connections to happen. And that allows me a lot of the times when I work with living systems to have room for the unexpected. And that is probably why I'm very excited about working and really be part of like relating with living systems, because for me it's also a source of kind of a conversation that can happen when you start with something and then the biosystem is responding. So it's like a conversation. So that's why I feel that relationships are the basis. And of course that will include, if we consider the biodiversity as one of the measurements of how an ecosystem is doing, how resilient an ecosystem is. So yeah, everything is kind of interconnected in that way.
Maru, could I ask you a question? Could you say a little bit about your process of actually working with living systems?
Sure. So my background is in the sciences. I studied some studies in chemistry, plant chemistry specifically. So yeah, I can say that my love, I started like with plants. My love for science started with that. But then I've been also able to work with microbes, yeah, like with cultures inside of my own studio / lab, which I have some cultures, living cultures with me. So I have one that is made, the one that is used for kombucha. That's one of the cultures that I use a lot for some of my projects. And in this case, for the piece that is in SLOMA, it's actually a collaboration with Emma and her mom. In this piece that we were working now, collaborating with algae. So that's like other type of organisms that I really like, because it's in a way getting to know someone new. So yeah, every time that I expand my horizons to work with other living organisms, it's like, yeah, let me introduce myself. And there is this moment in which we don't know anything about us, and then we have to develop that relationship. So it's part of what I really want to do every time that I work with living organisms.
I love this idea of relationship building that we're speaking about. And it also strikes me when we're thinking about biodiversity that there's a lot of work in the exhibition that illustrates the beauty of some of these ecosystems. But then I also think of how, I guess, the phrase beauty is in the beholder's eye, because for example, Emma and Maru, Emma, I know you work with kelp forests a lot, and Maru working with algae. Probably not everybody would be like, oh, wow, beautiful algae, they're so beautiful, even though I'm sure many of us on this call think that. And so I guess it's more of a comment than a question, but just to point out, also, I think the power that comes with art sometimes is the ability to pull out some of these less enticing, especially with artists working with the environment, less enticing species. Might be the most beautiful coral reefs. You know, Courtney, I've seen in some of your works when the corals are dying and they're not as colorful, and to really be able to pull out some of those stories as well, and talk about how critical even those species are to the overall ecosystem and interconnectivity. And yeah, so I think that was more of a comment than a question, but it was something that was interesting to notice hearing everyone speak, and makes me think about how critical it is to reignite our relationships with some of these species that we might feel really distant from, like algae and other ocean organisms.
Yeah, that's something that I've played with a lot. I appreciate, Isabel, what you're talking about with kind of that slimy algae that isn't very pretty to look at, but it's an important part of the story. And in terms of coral reefs, like after a reef bleaches and dies, it gets smothered in this slimy green algae that's just horrible looking. And I've had to experiment a lot with how to portray that in a way that people still want to look at, because I want to kind of seduce people in and have them appreciate kind of the intricate detail of the work without being completely turned off and like, ew, what's that? So it's an experiment. And I feel like if you look closely enough, especially under a microscope, or if you just pay attention, there are really beautiful aspects to all of those critters. So that's always a fun challenge.
In our project, we think about the unrepresented species that we work with is basically non-professional artists, basically, not because we chose it, because they chose themselves, but they're basically middle-aged women who consider themselves to be crafters. And so crafting in the arts world, I know it's having a kind of a comeback now, but still, as far as I can see, the art world still considers craft. It depends on who's making it and which kind of craft, but particularly feminine, what is traditionally gendered as feminine handicrafts in modern Western culture, is basically anathema to the art world. It really is. And despite the fact that the crochet coral reef has had a great deal of publicity, it hasn't really had it in the art world, even though I know we got into the Biennale. And so we consider that our interspecies collaboration is with non-professional women who are all incredibly creative, and all of them have houses full of yarn and houses full of things that they have made. But even their best friends think they're mad and are not interested in their making skills and what they make, except other crafters, because women's handicrafts are not really appreciated very much in our culture. So we feel that we've been sneaking, one of the major aspects of our project is sneaking in this feminine handicraft into the art world and occasionally into science museums via the back door. So our interspecies collaboration is with, as I said, people who are not artists but crafters. And I think it's a politically important question, because craft is still something that many, many women do. And as a medium, well, the textile feminine handicrafts, it is very difficult to get the art world and the world in general to valorize this as seriously creative activity. It's just seen as sort of intuitive making that doesn't really require conceptualization or But we, as I said, you know, through the tens of thousands of women, it's predominantly women who have contributed, have made incredible things and something overall. So, you know, interspecies communication can be with subspecies of human beings that may be excluded in other senses. In this case, in the art and also in the sciences. Actually, what's interesting is that quite a lot of our collaborators are women who did have careers in science, usually in engineering and computer programming, but who got pushed out of their careers early, because that happens a lot to women in the sciences. And they've taken up crafting as a kind of a substitute for what they did in their scientific, particularly their scientific computer programming work. And they approach it in this very kind of formalized manner, which is kind of interesting to me, because I'm completely the opposite. So that's my contribution. Although I have to say, I love interspecies communication with algae, and you know, I wish I had my own personal algae to say hello to every morning. Perhaps I'll cultivate one. I'll get myself an algae, a pet algae at home.
I feel like this is a good place for me to chime in, as I'm such a fan of algae, but I think my focus has been on the macro algae and kelp forests. But I'm feeling very inspired by the conversation that we've had here so far tonight, and hearing more about everybody's process and works and how it relates to the ocean, and connecting ourselves back to this place, this expansive place that we all feel strongly that we're a part of and that we can express about. And I am so glad that Ben just changed his background to algae. This is incredible. Is that sargassum? Can you quickly say what species that is? And then I there was something I was going to say, but
yes, it is. It's the pelagic sargassum from the Caribbean.
Sargassum, there it is. And where would we find sargassum, Ben?
Well, sargassum, it is a genus of algae that's found probably worldwide. There's a lot of different species that are tropical. This is actually a open ocean species that lives by drifting at the surface. You can sort of see behind me in that image, there's some little balls. Those actually have air in it, that gas in it that help it float. The Sargasso Sea in the middle of the Atlantic is named because this stuff accumulates there. But it's also found on reefs all over the place. There's some native species in California, and we have some introduced species here. And I am not an algae specialist, so I'm going to assume that it's probably found in various types of species of sargassum are found worldwide. But I'm sure that there's a phycologist out there that will correct me. So.
Amazing.
Can I just butt in for a second and ask Ben a question? Is the Sargasso Sea the same place as where the Great Pacific Garbage Patch now is? Is that the same?
No. No? Yeah, no. So the Sargasso Sea is sort of the middle of the Atlantic, although the process that generates the Great Pacific Garbage Patch and the Sargasso Sea are very similar. So it's that ocean circulation that tends to accumulate stuff. The sargassum accumulates in that center part of the Atlantic. And my assumption, although I don't actually know, is that there's probably an accumulation of floating garbage there as well. And then the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is this area, in the Pacific that sits in this gyre that tends to accumulate things like trash. Although there's a huge misconception about that. It's not like this patch that you can see from space that's as big as Texas or whatever it is. It's basically just that the density of trash is a little bit higher there than you see in the open ocean. So you have to really be paying attention to notice that you're in it when you're in it. So again, from what I've seen, I've actually never been to the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, so I don't know from firsthand. But
yeah, I think this is a good segue. This is also an interesting correlation that's been built between algae and also the garbage patch. My last question for you all is, do you feel that you yourself are a part of the marine ecosystems? Do you feel like humankind is a part of it? And if so, do you try to convey that in your work or in your research? And how would you express to people that if you are thinking in this way, that we are a part of the marine ecosystem? Because I know that culturally and politically, there's been so much distance and tension and mysticism of the ocean. So I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts on this while we wrap up the conversation.
That's a good question. I think you have to quote Sylvia Earle if you ask that question, because she says we're all sea creatures. And you have to agree with that, because we all depend on the sea for survival, and every breath we take and every drop of water we drink is connected to the sea. So her words are better than mine.
We're also, I've forgotten, is it 97% water? I've forgotten what the percentage is, but basically one theory is that the dominant force on this planet is water, and living organisms of all kinds are just vehicles for transporting water around in different ways. And I like to think of myself as basically a mobile water bucket. Whether it's, and I guess it's got salt in it too, so I'm a salty water bucket.
That is fun. And I'm considering too the idea that we all come from the ocean, right? So our ancestors are coming from there. So I have to be honest, in my case, I was born in an inner city. So I didn't have much of this relationship at that time with the ocean. It is until now that I have more access to the ocean and in general to be able to develop this relationship too. But it's actually something that is now, like after knowing like where the oxygen comes and all that, like it's in my mind now, and really wanting to go further in this frontier that I had in my mind. And probably a lot of people that are more in inner cities, probably that they have that kind of experience of like needing to go and really explore themselves, what it means to be part of the ocean. And yeah, for me, for a long time was just like a source of mystery. I had respect, of course. I was like very overwhelmed about the vastness every time that I was able to visit in my childhood, like a couple of times. And even I can say like some fear too. So there are a lot of mixed feelings. And I think it's worth exploring how can we really better relate with our different ecosystems, knowing that we are part of one single one. So yeah, I will want to reclaim my ancestors and want to go back to the origins and try to develop further relationships with more marine life.
So much of our research that we do at Cal Poly and in my lab is focused on people. We're doing applied work trying to say, okay, people have done these things to this system. Are there ways for us to do stuff? Or are there ways for us to do things better? A lot of our work lately is focused on the oceans. A lot of times people think about climate change and the oceans are just a victim of climate change. And we think that there are ways we can help make the oceans part of the solution. Because like everyone has said, the oceans are critical to our survival, and they have provided us with life, and there are ways that we can help the ocean heal and help the ocean heal us too.
Wow, beautiful words from all of you. This has been incredible to share this space together. Thank you again for being here. I think we have some closing notes from Emma before we leave, but I'm in awe of this conversation, and I will probably revisit this myself in a recording.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, and all our panelists for your thoughtful responses. I love the merging of worlds that happened, and I really hope that maybe future collaborations happen in the future. So thanks everyone for spending the evening with us. If you are local to San Luis Obispo, our exhibition Objectifying closes on Sunday, so get thee to the museum to see that. Atmospheres Deep. I hope now that you've listened to this panel, you have a deeper sense of the work in the show and can engage it on a more meaningful level. So this show closes, Atmospheres Deep closes on August 1st. We are doing a second Saturday activity every second Saturday of the month from 11 to 1, which will now be sort of an in-person facilitated activity, and the next one correlates with Atmospheres Deep. So we're really excited to share that with you. That will be next Saturday from 11 to 1. So the best way to keep up with the museum and what's going on is to follow us on social media. I will put our handle in, actually, Courtney Davis, if you're on, if you could put the museum's Instagram handle in the chat, that would be amazing. Emma, did you want me to share the websites of all our panelists in the chat as well for anybody? I saw those in our document.
If it's okay with everybody, would you like to have your website shared with the panelists or with the participants or listeners?
Is that okay? Okay, awesome. I will go ahead and post those in there. Well, we also have recorded this conversation, and I'm sure we'll be listing it on our website in the future and sending it out. So please stay tuned for all of that. But in the meantime, thank you, Emma, Isabel, me for spending this time with us, and to everyone who tuned in.
Thank you for both organising the panel and what is a really beautiful exhibition. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.